don't think I need a microphone. No. Okay. Should I? Can the camera see me? Or no, I can sit up here. I can stay up here.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I'll stay up here. I'll sit in the other chair. Yes, that's fine. Okay, so before we start out, I want to ask a question, and I guess just like raise your hands. Aside from this book, who has heard about Pokemon or seen something related to Pokemon today? So that's a pretty good ratio, and it makes sense. Pokemon is the highest grossing entertainment franchise of all time. It has made more money than Star Wars. It has made more money than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It has made more money than Mickey Mouse. It is gigantic. It is all-encompassing. It is, at this point, literally elemental. You breathe Pokemon. I usually, whenever I talk about it, I usually refer to the fact that if you go to Target, there's something on every aisle related to Pokemon, and I tested out that feature, and it's true. In every single section, you can find something associated with Pokemon. But it wasn't always like that. If you remember the late 90s, there was a wave of, or kind of a pop culture trend called Pokemania. And Pokemania was a term created by cultural pundits and newscasters alike to try their best to describe what was happening to the nation's youth and why they were suddenly transfixed with 150 monsters that had appeared out of nowhere from Japan. But I don't know. But Pokemon didn't come out of nowhere. It hadn't been created in a flash, and despite what many people were prone to say around the time, it wasn't created haphazardly and just shipped over to the U.S. for non-concerning consumers. Pokemon had been in the works for almost a decade by the time it got to the U.S. And even before it came to the U.S., Pokemon had already begun making waves. In December of 1997, 2 articles appeared in the New York Times within around 8 days of one another. And they both kind of effectively encapsulate Pokemon's mass impact when it got here. That's the first portion I'm going to read, if you'd like to read along. You don't have to, don't do that. You can all take turns. Nate, you go first. No, but it's chapter 3 for kids. In December 1997, 9 months before its American debut, Pokemon was mentioned twice in the New York Times in the span of just a few days. However, the articles weren't necessarily about Pokemon, but about Pokemon's effects. Its reputation had preceded it, though definitely not in a way that its creators would have preferred. The first article, published on December 8th, marveled at the Game Boy's longevity, with the handheld now in its 8th year of life, and how even when compared to its higher power contemporaries, the Game Boy lives. For those that don't know, and I talked about this earlier in the book, the Game Boy was invented, or was first released in 1989 by Nintendo, and it was kind of the little engine that could. If you look at it compared to like the Nintendo Switch now, the Game Boy just kind of, the original big blocky gray Game Boy kind of looks like a weird toaster, but it out like, and the usual life cycle of a video game system is about 6 years. Well, the Game Boy lasted 6 years, and on its 6th year, Pokemon was set to come out, which was not great timing. The people behind Pokemon on the Game Boy thought, you know, you don't want your potential next massive franchise to debut on a dead system. But it effectively breathed a second wind into the Game Boy. And all of a sudden, the Game Boy was getting better sales than it had in the first year of its life. It was outselling the Nintendo 64, which was Nintendo's big home console. But back to the book. After a price drop, a change in the size of the hardware, and the release of a game called Pocket Monsters, whatever clouds that once hung over the Game Boy's future had been cleared. Sales for the handheld had even shot past those of the Nintendo 64, Nintendo's main home console at the time, and one that had only been released the year before. Though Pokemon's assistance in the handheld's achievement got half a sentence, it was an inspiring comeback story, even if it's happening to a little block of buttons, plastic, and wire. The second article, which was published 8 days later, is much more serious, as the events reported within it would serve as a macabre signal flare for the franchise's imminent arrival. Nearly 700 Japanese children had been sent to the hospital for medical emergencies caused by the intense flashing lights of an animated TV show. Some vomited blood, some had seizures, some lost consciousness, and all of the producers of the animated show were confused as to how an effect used hundreds of times could suddenly create such a violent and tragic reaction. It's not until the 10th paragraph that the New York Times mentions the show that actually caused the incidents. Pocket Monsters. Hiroshi Yamauchi, president of Nintendo at the time, pointed a finger at TV Tokyo, the station that aired the anime, and TV Tokyo quickly announced that it would cancel all of the broadcasts of the program. Police promised to investigate the event, and in the end, thanks to an episode called Electric Soldier Porygon, the Pokemon anime was placed on hold for 4 months. However, the most interesting quote comes from a third grader who, after talking about the episode making her dizzy, said, "I'd be sad if I could not watch the program anymore." That particular incident would kind of become Pokemon's cultural calling card years later. If you remember the episode and it's referenced in a lot of places, but the one that comes to mind first, if you remember that episode of The Simpsons where they go to Japan and Bart says, "Hey, it's that cartoon that gives you seizures." But that was around the time when Pokemon, after first landing in September 1998, had taken the world by storm. It first appeared in anime form about 2.5 weeks before the game, which is a weird way to do things, especially in America, because the way we mostly create franchises is you have the big thing first, and if the big thing does well, you do a lot of little things. The way we create stuff is that, like, for instance, you make Batman. Batman comics do good, you make a Batman radio show. Batman radio show does good, you make a Batman serial for TV, or to play before movies. That's the way that stuff does, and that's the way that normally things are handled. One thing that caused the mass reaction to Pokemon is the fact that Pokemon kind of came all at once. The TV show came out, and then the video it presented like a teaser taster for the anime to come out 2.5 weeks later, and then the trading cards came out in that January. The merchandise came around on Christmas. The little Pokemon Pikachu, if you had the little pedometer that was shaped like a tiny Game Boy that Pikachu counted your steps and then got mad at you if you didn't talk to him for an hour, that came out around the same time. So there was all this merchandise hitting, and we'd never really seen anything like it before. There was no contemporary that we could compare it to. Even like Nintendo's flagship series, Mario, had been like, okay, there's a game, there's a TV show that not a lot of people watch. That's about it. But Pokemon came immediately and came all over the place. But as 1999 came in, it turned out that was not the only franchise that was vying for a piece of the monster collecting pie. If you were a person of exquisite taste, as the millennium changed, you watched Digimon, Digital Monsters, which is a very cool show that I rewatched perhaps too many times for writing this book. But one thing that I did not know before researching this is that Digimon is actually the younger brother of a different franchise, and that is the Tamagotchi. That's the section. It's in beginning of chapter 5 that I'm going to go back to because especially when it comes to the virtual pet, which Pokemon borrows a lot of aspects of. in terms of Digimon. In fact, it had been in the making for years, with its roots going all the way back to 1995 in a game called Dogs, spelled with a Z because it was cooler that way in the 90s. Developed primarily by a video game company called PF Magic, Dogs was the first ever virtual pet. It was a straightforward game that gave people the chance to choose from a few breeds of dogs and then raise one on your computer. You fed them, trained them, rewarded them, and tried to keep them from running away. All actions that will become trademarks of the virtual pet genre. It was successful enough for the company to create, you guessed it, cats. But even with dogs and cats, the virtual pet options were still really limited. Not technologically, this was still really cool for 1995, but in how your virtual pet filled the role of an actual pet. For example, if you're the owner of a wonderful dog with no Z, you'd likely say that one of the best things about it is being able to go places with it, like taking it outside and for walks, among other things. So it's easy to see how a lot of the pet raising experience is lost when you're forced to do it while you sit in the desk chair at your family computer. To progress, the virtual pet would have to become something that its owners could take out and care for on the go. Enter Akimaita, the Japanese entertainment company Bandai, and Akira Yokoi, a toy developer who also used to work for Bandai. Once Yokoi saw a commercial featuring a kid who wanted to take his pet turtle on a family trip, only to be scolded by his mother. Tragic, obviously. Someone please get that turtle to Disney World ASAP. Anyway, Yokoi was intrigued by this. What if his turtleless nightmare was over? What if you could bring pets with you, not just to places that allowed pets within the guidelines, but anywhere? He also wondered what would happen if you didn't try to eliminate the work that goes into pet raising, but embraced it. According to Yokoi, pets are only cute 20 to 30% of the time, and the rest is a lot of trouble, a lot of work. He felt that the work helped one fall in love with a pet, and he took his plan to create a mobile, high-maintenance pet to his former employer. Akimaita agreed with Yokoi and realized that people would love a pet that they could take with them regardless of destination, but saw some salesmen at Bandai grimace at the idea. Why would people be interested in a digital pet that you had to carry around and keep alive? What's so fun about this? Despite this less than positive feedback, Maeda decided to work with Yokoi to develop what would become the Tamagotchi, a portmanteau of the Japanese words for egg and friend, that lived inside of a device the size of a wristwatch. They even developed a backstory for the little creature. And the backstory is something that kind of got removed when it came to the US, because the US packaging was pretty much like easy to just rip apart and take your little pet out, pull the little plasticky strip out, and then, feed it and let it poop. But in Japan, there was a whole backstory to it. And that's one thing that we never really got, especially even when it came to Digimon, is the virtual pets over here, is that Japan invented an entire mythology for it. And then when it came to America, they were like, they fight, that's all. But the backstory for the Tamagotchi was a scientist found a crashed UFO full of tiny aliens that could not survive on Earth due to the atmosphere. So he rushed them back to his lab and invented an egg-shaped case for them. Thus, the Tamagotchi was not just a toy, but a little creature in a little home. It's certainly an effective story because it reminded players that it wasn't just a protective toy case they were holding as they pressed those little buttons on the bottom. It was the Tamagotchi's only chance at life. You were the Tamagotchi's only chance at life. While Bandai remained skeptical, feeling that the concept needed more work, Maeda, who would eventually become the face of the entire operation and a leader in developing the Tamagotchi further, was more than up for the challenge. She took the prototypes to the streets of Shibuya, a popular ward in Tokyo known for its liveliness and commercial footprint, where she tested the virtual pet on its eventual prime demographic. Most people seemed fascinated by the little monsters and their egg dwellings. However, high school girls absolutely adored them. Maeda kept track of their reactions and feedback, the colors they liked best, the shapes they preferred, and the aspects they favored. And by the following year, on November 23rd, 1996, the Tamagotchi was ready for its official debut, and people went wild over it. Within 2 years, 40 million pets were sold. And even though some stores were initially hesitant to carry them, most likely because they were able to see the appeal of a fake pet they were forced to clean up after, soon they added the virtual pet to their stock and they could barely keep them on the shelves. In fact, the pets were so popular that a Tamagotchi black market emerged, with both authentic and knockoff Tamagotchi pets sometimes selling for anywhere between 20 and 60 times the store price. Then, of course, once these millions of customers bought their extraterrestrial pets home, it was time for the relationship to begin. In some cases, it simply involved treating their new little alien pets as tiny time wasters, but others found true connection. They agonized over their Tamagotchi, lost sleep, missed school, dedicated themselves to their welfare, and debated the merits of restarting them after they passed on. And this dedication and love wasn't limited to Tamagotchi owners who lived in Japan, but to owners all over the world. In fact, in 1998, a portion of a pet cemetery in England became devoted to providing a final resting place to little Tamagotchi, with people from around the world sending in their pets to be buried there. To each of them, the Tamagotchi was not a video game, but a creature that they loved and done their best to care for. It was sad that, as all pets eventually do, the Tamagotchi died. However, in refusing to replace them like you would a normal toy, people had decided to bid farewell to them entirely, calling into question even further of what a pet can be. Similar to the events that acted as the catalyst to the creation of Pokemon, the Tamagotchi and the attachment that some of its owners had to them stems from the rampant urbanization of Japan, which culminated in the existential depression of the lost decade recession. Quick, not very fun fact. After post-occupation Japan's economy did very, very, very well. There was rampant sprawl, rampant suburban sprawl especially. The population went up and up and up. But then around the mid-'80s, they noticed that inflation was going really high and no one was really wanted to do anything about it. And then the Bank of Japan was like, maybe we'll increase interest rates. And the government was like, and then it popped. And it created one of the worst recessions that the modern world has ever seen. The effects are still being felt today. If you've ever heard of the term hikikomori, which is basically a common term for shonen in Japan, it became super popular at that point because all of a sudden people, you expect to, with an economy going well, you expect to leave school, find a job, have a family. But all of a sudden these opportunities are being taken away and it causes this mass kind of existential crisis among an entire generation. As depressions often do. Studies have shown that in times of financial crisis, people are more likely to be desperate for connection, pushed into the cities and surrounding areas with the promise of economic and societal safety, and then abandoned by the plummeting market. Millions of people in Japan were now stranded with limited ways to take care of themselves and others. The concrete walls that surrounded them both inside and outside the cities seemed more like a tomb than a metropolitan oasis. To cope with this loneliness, people often turn to pets like dogs, cats, lizards, horses, or anything that might relieve the mental and emotional burdens of isolation. However, owning and taking care of a pet, like a dog, for example, becomes a bit complicated when you live in a city with few places for it to poop and sniff comfortably. So the option of having a digital pet that fits easily into your pocket is very appealing. Though, through it, you're able to fulfill the very human need to take care of something and also feel companionship, all without having to figure out what your landlord's pet policy is. Like how Satoshi Tajiri figured that people living in Japan might thirst for an adventure where you explored and gathered creatures, Maeda and Yokoi struck a similar nerve and commercial goal too. They realized that no matter how far a person moved downtown, they still enjoyed keeping a pet. The Tamagotchi was a recreation of nature and kinship through a digital space. The Tamagotchi also, as I've said before, the Tamagotchi also came to America. It came to America a little bit before Pokemon did. By Pokemon's time, both it and the very American Gigapet were already kind of fading away. And Pokemon effectively usurped it by taking like, oh, you want to carry a Tamagotchi pet? How about 6 of them and they can fight? So Pokemon in 1999 was unstoppable. There were the 2 New York Times articles that had come out within 8 days of each other had erupted into an entire industry based around counseling parents about their Pokemon addicted children. There was like a learning. It was a lot of them that had titles like "Learning to Live with Pokemon," it was very much a time where, as I said, they didn't know what it was. And because no one was really that eager to translate, the interviews that were going on in Japan, they continued to not know what it was. And so you had all sorts of rumors started like, oh, Pokemon was created to incite violence. Pokemon was created to capitalize on scary globalization. But it wasn't. Speaking to Time magazine in an article that didn't appear in Main Time, but in Time Asia, which not a lot of people read, the first, if you remember, there was the big cover. It's between The month before, the cover story had been about John McCain's chances at re-election. And then the one after was preparing for the Y2K crisis. And then between it, just as important as a new president in Y2K was Pokemon, the Time magazine issue. And the cover story was like, but are you getting addicted? And the main go-to example of people getting addicted to Pokemon was the trading card game, which had kind of become the ambassador for all the cultural fears about Pokemon itself. And that is the next one that I'm going to read from. This is in chapter 6, Blockbuster. Tommy Priest had experience with card games. He helped lead events for Wizards of the Coast to promote the new Magic the Gathering decks, and eventually he'd get the call to work with Wizards to develop a Pokemon trading card game mall tour. The Magic the Gathering tours had been successful, and since, by the spring of 1999, Pokemon had shown no signs of slowing down, there was reason to believe that a series of mall events would strengthen the brand, promote some merch, and get kids enthusiastic about the cards. What Priest never could have anticipated was just how enthusiastic they would be. After successful events in Miami and Atlanta, Priest and his team headed to the largest mall in New Jersey, where over 10,000 people showed up and stood in line, Priest remembered. As the crowd grew, the fire department arrived, shut down the event, and closed the mall for exceeding fire capacity. We had to hide out in the mall management office until the crowds were cleared, Priest remembers. Some people were in line for 5 hours and were not happy about the shutdown. Like the games and the anime before it, the trading card game had taken on a life of its own, and one perhaps that took the brunt of Pokemon's backlash, at least in America. Its accelerated rise in notoriety would cause it to become the scourge of schools across the country. Accessible, collectible, and portable, the cards were brought by kids to school en masse, and teachers and other school staff would spend most of the 1999 school year trying to plug the holes in their ship, the openings leaking Pikachu, Charizard, and 149 others into the cafeteria. While the game had come out the year before, as the franchise grew, so did the card game's popularity, making it an escalating issue that carried throughout the year, as cards were banned in schools in multiple states as early as April 1999. Wizards of the Coast was extremely pleased with its performance. It's just turned into the hottest thing, said spokeswoman Carol Rogalski to the Associated Press. But by the fall, suddenly phrases like trading pits were used to discuss the fervor in which kids approached their new extracurricular obsession, bringing to mind black market dealings rather than a circle of children shouting about cards into the bus lot. One principal, not sensing the irony, said it's just become such a monster when discussing the Pocket Monster panic. Huh? Yeah? Booster packs of the cards ranged around $3, not extravagant enough to prevent them from being bought in bulk by parents desperate to keep up with their kids' insatiable appetite. But was it just an appetite, or had it spiraled into actual addiction? There was an argument that before kids opened the packs, they didn't know what cards they would be getting, which falls under certain definitions of gambling. They just had to hope that they would get a rare card every once in a while, a roulette to nab something either tinted with holographic art or powerful enough to battle that would make their trip to the KB Toys worth it. It's not exactly casino-level thrills, but there was potential for trouble, and trouble would soon be found. While there was the general, these prices are getting higher and they're outselling baseball cards, anxieties reflected by some hobby shop owners, there was also actual crime making its way to the Pokemon world, crime that even Team Rocket likely wouldn't have been competent enough to manage. From May to December 1999, $20 million worth of bootleg Pokemon merchandise, much of which was trading cards intended to be sold to clueless parents and kids, was seized by authorities. Then there was a $1 million fake Pokemon card operation, though it wouldn't be the last. A teenager in Canada was stabbed over a dispute involving the cards, and there were multiple reports of the game causing fights. One young boy stayed inside of a store until after it closed in order to steal dozens of packs of cards, only to call 911 when he realized that being locked in a store meant that he couldn't get out of the store. So, looking back at Pokemon now that it's so kind of ever-present, it does seem consistently weird that there was such a panic about it. The news stations and cultural critics not really doing research certainly didn't help. But There was also, we probably remember from our parents freaking out about it, was the imminent Y2K crash, where we feared a multitude of things, including the idea that all of the internet in the world would suddenly shut down for some reason. And Pokemon, having been basically the last major millennial franchise to show up before the turn of 2000, was public enemy number one. There were a lot of still lingering fears also about Japan's economic status, even though if they'd done their research, they would have known that Japan just went into a recession and that we weren't dealing with the 80s when we made entire movies starring Michael Keaton called Gung Ho, which is basically teaching American auto manufacturers how to deal with Japanese clients. It was a lot of cultural factors kind of playing in at the same time. That again, a second or another second of research would have alleviated that. But Pokemon had come in too fast and too strong. But it wouldn't always last that way. Like all trends, the hype is usually biggest in the beginning, and then they kind of dissipate away. You saw the same thing happen about a year before Pokemon emerged with Furby, where there was basically an entire sub-economy of America was dedicated to buying and selling Furby. And then one wrong move of miscalculating a number they needed to sell of a Millennium tie-in sent the whole thing crashing down. Pokemon didn't have anything that big, though pop culture would have you believe it. This is mostly because when you are getting ramped up to be the best-selling anything of all time, any fall from the top is going to seem like a giant drop. But the people behind Pokemon, especially the American licensor known as 4Kids Entertainment, who were dedicated to basically localizing and producing a lot of American anime at the time, they had one last kind of trick before Pokemon was set to go up into the sunset. They were going to produce a Pokemon musical. And if you don't remember a Pokemon musical, there's a really good reason for that. This is chapter 10, maybe? Chapter 9, Heart of the Cards. Pokemon Live. Ash Ketchum and Team Rocket's leader, Giovanni, used to be roommates. Well, the actors that played them in Pokemon Live did. Studying at the Boston Conservatory, Dominic Nolfi and Darren Dunstan were both subletting in the same apartment and were both part of the group called up to audition for a Pokemon musical. It was exciting, as it would be the first major show for both, even if they didn't exactly know what Pokemon really was. I was aware that it existed. I'm not sure I'd ever seen it, Dunstan remembered. I'm sure I'd scrambled to try and find something somewhere, but that was 2000. The internet was limited and I didn't have a smartphone. I'm not even sure I saw my character in the show until after Pokemon Live existed. Nolfi, on the other hand, would enlist some help from people much more likely to be adept in Pokemon studies than two busy theater students. I remember I called my cousins who were in middle school and they gave me the whole rundown. I had to ask, what does Ash do? Who is Pikachu to him? What is Pikachu? What's their relationship and what are the evil people? We did a crash course. Nolfi would end up playing Ash and Dunstan the evil Giovanni, with two other students from the conservatory playing Misty and Professor Oak. Such a great group of people, Dunstan said, remembering the show, a production that was the brainchild of Norman Grossfeld. Now, to back up a little bit, Norman Grossfeld was president at the time of 4Kids, and if you go back, if you read the book, you'll learn that there was a lot of different theories as to how good Pokemon was going to do when it hit the United States. There was a full spectrum. On one side, you had people that were like, this is going to tank all of our careers and you're going to ruin us with this thing. And on the other side, you had people like, I'll never have to worry about money again. Grossfeld was in the latter category. He figured that if Pokemon became popular in Japan, kids are kids everywhere. They're going to like Pokemon over here. Grossfeld went with various Broadway producers, but was unable to locate a fit that would work for Pokemon's audience in his desired time frame until he partnered with Radio City Music Hall, concocting a story that would lead Ash and the other characters of the show to take on Giovanni, reunite with Mewtwo, and ultimately face a Mecha Mewtwo. He wanted to have a true Pokemon experience from a story perspective. Plus, with it being a musical, some of the work had already been done. I also felt that we at that point, had a really good library of some songs that could work in a musical, and that we were maybe 25% of the way there already. If you look at the top best-selling albums from 1999, you'll find a lot of boy bands, probably something like Mariah Carey in there, and you'll also find Pokemon To Be a Master, which, if you listen to, has such great songs as the Pokemon theme, the Poke Rap, What Kind of Pokemon Are You? We're on the Road to Viridian City. My Best Friends, the song about Ash and Pikachu's relationship that I totally didn't cry about. They basically had that all accomplished because for kids, for as kind of dated as we're going to take Pokemon and change everything about it to an American cartoon programming block, was really dedicated to ensuring that you didn't graduate middle school or elementary school in the late 90s without knowing what Pikachu was. To write the rest of the script, veteran playwright Michael Slade was hired. Slade, who passed away in late 2020, was experienced with writing family theater and had also been nominated for a Writers Guild Award for his soap opera work. One thing he wasn't experienced with was Pokemon, a fact he lied about when contacted by Radio City. I said, "Oh, I know all about Pokemon. You know, Pikachu," Slade told the Game Informer show. Fact of the matter was, other than that word Pikachu, that was the extent of my Pokemon knowledge. "I don't know what drugs these people are on," Slade recalled, thinking when he was sent the first movie to watch for research. But despite his hesitations about the short writing and production schedule and the budget, basically everything, Slade found it to be a really cool gig. His script, one that was approved by 4Kids and Nintendo and implied that Ash was Giovanni's son, was filled with as many Pokemon as money would allow. One that would be brought to life with a mixture of puppetry and little people in costume. In the latter category were Pikachu and Team Rocket's Meowth, with his voice actress, Maddie Blaustein, among others from the show, dropping by to offer their feedback. She would also voice the character in live, as would Pikachu's anime actress, Ikuyo Otani, their voices dubbed over loudspeaker. The entire show was planned to be very akin to The Lion King, a massively successful costume and puppet-heavy show that had recently won copious awards. Pokemon Live wouldn't do as good as The Lion King. It wouldn't just be a typical performance, though. From the first previews in Albany, New York, the show was a multimedia event constructed to recall the joys of the anime in a theatrical setting, with screens above the performers and props playing clips of the show that Grossfeld had edited himself. Describing a well-received joke in which the Pokemon Snubbull appears on Ash's underwear as he jumps out of the bed to start his adventure, dancing like Tom Cruise in Risky Business, Grossfeld said, "It's because the kids knew the character from the TV show, and they were connected to it." Along with the videos playing edited clips, the puppets, props, and costumes all replicated elements found in the show. Of course, this meant there would be a problem or two, though one would end up being quite important: Ash's hair. In the show, Ash Ketchum has the spiky hair of an excitable adolescent anime protagonist, something that's much easier to pull off in a cartoon than in real life. It didn't mean that the creators of Pokemon Live didn't try. The results left Nolfi with one of the most unpleasant experiences of the entire show. The director was like, "Keep growing your hair." So it grew, and it looked kind of like Ash's hair. But when the Japanese artists came in, they pictured the show like more cartoony, and the director pictured the show more real. And they were like, "Cut his hair and put a wig on him." And I was like, "Please no, I don't want to wear a wig. I already have to wear a hat anyway, so what's the point? Just style the back, right?" They insisted, so we tried a wig. Wig didn't work. Everyone hated the wig. So I went to a place in Tribeca and got hair weaves, and these women gave me a plastic tract of hair. It was the most uncomfortable, itchy, awful thing, and after the Radio City run, I just ripped them out. I said, I'm done, just put the wig on me until it grows. Having to match the designs of the anime combined with the hectic schedule of a stage performance made for an arduous experience. While performers like Dunstan and Nolfi, who would have his face in the New York Times thanks to an ad for the show, were thrilled to be touring it at Radio City Music Hall at such an entry point in their careers, they soon realized that acting and singing in such a production multiple times a day was no easy task. The show was around 2 hours, and we'd finish the show, we'd have about 45 minutes to regroup, and on certain days we did it 4 times a day, Dunstan recalled. Dominic had the heaviest lift of all. He's on stage pretty much the whole time, and he's cranking out the high notes. Live's director, Luis Perez, was an experienced dancer and choreographer, and he kept a steady hand on something that could have easily spiraled into chaos. Ensuring that the curtain didn't fall on a pile of costumes and Pokemon puppet corpses was a constant battle. Jennifer Risser, who played Pikachu, she and I would get into arguments about blocking because I had to hold her hand a lot of the time. Nolfi remembered. We had to skip around on stage together, and she'd be like, "You're pulling too hard." And I just go where I say you go because there's pyro. One time she got a little too close to the pyro shooting up, and that was scary for both of us. After being kicked off with a somewhat glib playbill announcement of "Move over, Rockettes," the show toured from September 2000 to January of the next year, moving from Radio City Music Hall to arenas in Cleveland, Detroit, and Toronto, leaving kids entranced across North America. They'd be transfixed, Nolfi recalled. There was a show we did in Chicago which had steps up to the stage, so kids in the front row would just wander up while their parents were dealing with other kids. At one point, a little kid was just there looking up at me, and I held his hand and walked him down and gave him back to his mom, and then we kept on going. Despite the best efforts of its creators, Pokemon Live wasn't meant to last. A little over 4 months after its debut, the North American run of the tour was shut down. Versions showed up in places including Dubai and Belgium over the next year or so, but overall, it was never as much of a financial hit as intended. Grossfeld attributed the lack of success to Pokemon's aging fan base, one that might, by that time, be a little embarrassed to be seen watching it in a theater, away from the privacy of their Game Boy and TV screen. Regardless, he remains proud of his efforts. I felt like the show was better than its success. Now, there's a lot of stuff around that time, particularly with Pokemon, with Digimon, where you see weird kind of cultural stabs and mishaps. I don't know if any of you remember the Digibowl, but I'm going to go into that in a second when I can find it. One day, guys. One day. Talk about Pokemon amongst yourselves. Chapter 11, this section is called The Big Game. Terry Bradshaw was a quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers for 14 seasons and won 4 Super Bowl titles. He's a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame and post-retirement quickly moved on to becoming a commentator on CBS. As Fox acquired the rights for an NFL broadcast, Bradshaw moved to their pregame show Fox NFL Sunday, where he remains a fixture to this day, blending his massive brain and football knowledge with a kind of aw-shucks charisma. His greatest achievement, though, is unanimously agreed to be his role as the host of Fox Kids Digibowl in 2001 and 2002. Kicked off with the blaring brass of the NFL on Fox theme, the Digibowl ran for just 2 years, though it was a strange delight each time. It's uncertain who it was for. 9-year-olds watching Digimon probably didn't have any strong ties to Bradshaw's status or sports legacy, and football fans likely weren't too inclined to tune into short, competition-themed segments based on a series that pop culture usually considered Pokemon's second cousin. It wasn't cross-promotion as much as it was Fox's ludicrous attempt at a branding Venn diagram. Bradshaw, entirely alone in the Fox studio, interacted with various members of the animated cast, who, through looped lip-flap movements and voiceover, did most of the Digimon info heavy lifting. Credit goes to Bradshaw, though. While many Pokemon segments involving media personalities often included at least a hint of puzzled timidity, Bradshaw went all in. Super Bowls, they come and go, but the Digibowl, now that's exciting stuff, he shouted to kick out the 2001 edition. The duels were between the cast of the current season of Digital Monsters and the one previous, with points administered due to attacks landed in the episodes shown. Between every episode, Bradshaw names his most valuable Digimon. Agumon, love that pepper breath, baby. And offers analysis like, that Mega Myotismon is meaner than John Randall. Mega Myotismon, by the way, isn't the name of an actual Digimon on the show. Nor is it the name of any Digimon at all. But it doesn't really matter at this point. When we discuss why Digimon didn't succeed in the same way as Pokemon in North America, we often blame it on kids, the target audience for both. While it's true that too much of one thing can saturate a market, children are not blind in the things they gravitate to. Digimon wasn't drowned out by Pokemon, nor were kids likely confused by the pair. Ask a kid to tell you the names of all the DC and Marvel superheroes, or what Nintendo series each character from Super Smash Bros. Comes from, and you'll discover that it was entirely possible to keep up with both Digimon and Pokemon. Instead, what Digimon lacked was a coherent branding ethos, the gotta catch 'em all that would lead consumers from one bit to another. Their marketing for the games is entirely different from how the cards, the anime, or the virtual pets were presented. And though things like the Digimole are fun in that they seem like nostalgic hallucinations, they do not drive to introduce anything outside of themselves. So when fans recall Digimon and its impact in the West, they typically have memories of the anime, not just because it's actually a solid show that provided a good gateway to serialized animated storytelling, but because it existed alone for many. As 2000 moved to 2001, 2001 moved to 2002, a lot of things happened with Pokemon. First of all, the Game Boy, which had been its home for years, was eventually shelved, and the Game Boy Advance came out. Digimon, which found its home on Fox Kids, that programming block was eventually bought by 4Kids, and 4Kids rebranded as the Fox Box. Yu-Gi-Oh! Remained strong, but without any real competitors and without a big tie-in outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, its success, while very, very, very big, didn't last that long past the first series. And so many considered the monster collecting genre, especially with Pokemon at its forefront, to be kind of over. And it did. It existed and kind of absorbed into American pop culture iconography for a while. It was always popular, but it lay low. And then the summer of 2016 happened. And I don't know if you'll remember the summer of 2016, but it went something like this. It looks like something out of a blockbuster movie. Hundreds, maybe thousands of teens and adults rushing forward, temporarily blind to any possible danger. Some dodge cars on their way across a busy street, and others abandon their vehicles entirely to join in, leaving other drivers frustratedly honking their horns behind them. The tone of the group is nothing less than thrilled, an excited mass heading to one single location for one single purpose: Pokemon. But this isn't a movie, it's real life. Shortly after the July 6, 2016 launch of Pokemon Go, an app that in just a few years would become one of the most successful mobile games in history, all these folks have just discovered, staring down at the screen that illuminate their faces among the horde, that there is a Vaporeon in Central Park, New York City. So they hustle together, united by a franchise that many predicted would leave our cultural consciousness before the 21st century even kicked off. Amid the chatter, you can even hear shouts of, "I got him!" So a lot of this book is about Pokemon's kind of marketing impact, which is important. You can't really talk about Pokemon without talking about the ways that children's franchises are created and then spread around. But if you go back to its beginning, and you go back to its core ethos, Pokemon and Digimon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Metabots and Monthly Knights and Monster Rancher are not really about that. As a young boy in the Machida section from Tokyo, Satoshi Tajiri garnered a nickname Dr. Bug because he loved collecting bugs. He'd go through creeks, go through forests, trying to find a new interesting bug for his collection. But as Japan became more populated and as urban sprawl took away a lot of the areas where he used to hunt bugs, he realized that he probably needed to find a new hobby pretty fast. He found video games, luckily, and that eventually led to Pokemon. But Pokemon is based around a child's dream of this kind of natural utopia, where the human world has encroached just enough with the natural world to befriend it and partner with it. And that leads to the end of the book, the last page. And the future? Well, I think it's safe to say that whatever lies ahead for Pokemon will likely be successful. Earlier in 2022, we saw the release of Pokemon Legends Arceus, an open-world game set in the universe's distant past. With an adventure no longer restrained by the routes and strictly defined paths that have been a staple of nearly every previous Pokemon title, its announcement was greeted with almost unanimous enthusiasm. Finally, the Pokemon game of tomorrow was here. The one that would push it forward and defy the expectations we'd built over the last 2 decades. Still, it looked pretty Pokemon to me. You're a kid traveling around and meeting monsters that you catch, battle, and take with you as your travel companions. The land is lush and filled with opportunity. The Odyssey is brisk and curious. The tone is grand. You are a child leaving to go into the woods to flip over rocks and wade through streams. The things you encounter are larger than life, not just because they're fantastical beasts, but because of the way they're presented renders them as far more dignified than the TV screen or handheld device they're trapped in. In Pokemon, nature and exploration are more than just an alternative to the stuffy living that comes when real everyday life is dominated by small apartment walls, economic uncertainty, and the stringent process others often enforce on growing up. Instead, it's how we come to love the species of the world and how we relate to them. It's how we meet others and form relationships that can last a minute or a lifetime. Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Metabots, Monster Rancher, at their best, they embody the spirit of union through the excitement of play. When the game starts and someone welcomes you to the world of Pokemon, they mean more than just an area where these creatures exist, but a community that's bonded over shared experience. We trade not just monsters with each other, but knowledge, admiration, and joy. It is communication and competition and connection, back and forth like bugs on a wire. And that's all for my reading portions of it. What time is it? Like it. 6:48. Okay, perfect. We have 10 minutes, and first of all, if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. But if not, okay, I want to play. Cool. The book was that good. I like to ask people where they first heard about Pokemon. I guess with this abridged audience, we can start with Nate. Where did you first hear about Pokemon?
Actually, I don't know where I first heard it. I got the game when it came out. I remember bugging my mom to go get it. I can't remember where it was I first saw it. Maybe it was like I probably saw that episode of the anime, and I was like, "Ooh, I want that."
It's Gotta Catch 'Em All is which is basically got slapped everywhere until they realized that that legally it was probably going to cause a problem. Is really great. It's like the kind of catchphrase that like marketers dream about, and it was plastered everywhere in the beginning. It was like in more places than the actual title of the series was. It almost didn't happen because FTC regulations, even though loosened a little bit after the 80s, say that you can't sell things directly to, like you can't say, buy this to children. But they skirted that because Gotta Catch 'Em All, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the monsters or are they talking about the toys? Yeah, it was certainly super effective for it.
Elementary school cafeteria, some kid brought in a poster with all 150, and I was just like, what are these?
Yeah, kind of similar. It was elementary school. There was a card trading ring happening in my class, and the teachers banned Pokemon cards in school, which led to then every kid wanting to get a Pokemon card. So that was just other kids having it, and then the ban happening, and then being like, yeah, whatever it is, I'm in on it.
Yeah, it makes it super cool. One thing about Pokemon's allure, especially when it started out, is because usually when you become into something, it's because your parents like bought it for you, or they were okay with it. Like if you want to become a fan of Batman, but your parents don't really want Batman, you're not seeing that Batman movie. But when Pokemon came out and parents didn't have any like rationale for what it was, kids immediately became the experts of it. And that is a very, very powerful. If you want to create fans of something for life, make empower rather than like talk down. And every child show from the 90s that people remember with like any like semblance of nostalgia is usually due to the fact that like it can be quality stuff, but it usually didn't talk down to kids. It usually established that you watching it are the master of this domain. You are now the experts of it, and Pokemon definitely latched onto that. So, and it made the people who were promoting Pokemon were very quick to figure it out, which is why every Pokemon commercial around the time was a bunch of kids carrying Pokemon, and then like parents be like, "Whoa, Sunny D" or whatever. So it was very it made kids were immediately the Pokemon masters, and parents were the clueless Team Rocket. So
I remember I was very little, and a kid brought an entire binder of the cards. And as I was flipping through, I only liked the cat ones, and he gave me one because he said they were useless. So that was my first experience with it. I carried that around for a while, actually.
My older cousin was like the target age range, and I was too young to read, and I would just like piggyback off of him and just be like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I would watch over his shoulder. And so my mom got me one of the first games, and she's like, "You can't read. Like, you're too young. You can't read." And I would just push the buttons.
I just started a newsletter, Daniel Dockery's Many Words, and the thing I published today was how Pokemon helps kids learn how to read, because a lot of people after reading this book, people came to me and said Pokemon helped me learn how to read.
Yeah.
And really quick, the three summation is, first of all, it teaches kids how to contextualize words, especially part of a bigger phrase. Like you take Charmander. If you pull that apart, you have Char and Salamander, and you learn how words that have the same base definition, like Salamander and Char, can be combined to create different words, and that helps a lot in reading. The second thing was, because Game Boys have really little text boxes, everything had to be like a short, very definitive phrase, like, "Hey, I like shorts. They're comfy and easy to wear." Like because you click the A button, you get both phrases. You get both phrases in their completion, and so you don't have to worry about the thing of like getting caught in like grammatical obstructions when you're a child. You be able to read the sentence into one thing and move on. And the third thing is that as you grow up, if you look at like children's book that you get for little kids, it's usually person does thing, person does thing, person does thing. But as they get older, like I read to my toddler sometimes, it becomes person does thing, and then changes person. And Pokemon has a lot of that in it, especially when it comes to like trainers who usually meet are like, "Yeah, I've been catching bugs in this grass all day. I could beat you." And then at the end, they're like, "Oh, my bugs." So it's you learn a lot about very quick, digestible change, and it helps you further grasp like story arcs and stuff. Like growing up, you learn how the gears of an effective story are told through these small little bites, and that's very cool. But yeah.
Oh, I just remember like really wanting the giant Pikachu at the state fair. Like that's my like, I want to win that thing. So.
There's like an arms race of like giant Pikachu stuff. I remember one at the Winston-Salem, the fair in Winston-Salem, in October 1988, like just before Pokemon, like just after Pokemon came out, and they had a giant one there. And then as I was doing research, I found out that Pokemon's official North American debut happened in Topeka, Kansas, which they renamed Topekachu. And they dropped Pikachu dolls from the sky into a field. And they had these kids, just like these parents being like, hold, and then people skydived out and then got in cars shaped like Pikachu and drove around to malls and was like, "Hey, you on the curb, look at this game." But all these kids like rushed forward, and the reporter basically writes this like he writes it as if he's like experiencing like this like Pokemon introduction hangover, where he's like, "They like ran at the dolls and I didn't know what the dolls were." And they have a picture of a kid next to like a 10-foot like Pikachu plush. And it's because it's like a late 90s photo, it looks like a missing poster. Have you seen this Pokemon? Yeah, it's really cool. I remember seeing like Pikachu of like escalating size. Like if you knocked over one bottle, you got a little Pikachu, but that big Pikachu that your mom's going to carry around for the rest of the evening, you want that one.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, elementary school, like playground. I must have been like, third, fourth grade, whatever it was. But I remember friends were talking like, oh, have you heard about this new game? And I already had a Game Boy, right? The clear, like Indigo, which is already a big deal, right? Like it was all exciting with like Yoshi and Kirby, all the good games, and like Rampage and stuff. And they were like, oh, you can choose between red and blue. And I was like, what's a Pokemon? Like, what are you talking about? And then little, it's like life changing after that. Like red, yellow, all right. So yeah, it's just playground talking and picking out who has blue, who has red, and trying to make little infrared connectors work to do stuff on the Game Boy Color.
Pokemon giving like kids the ability to like have that many options and have it be that accessible essentially made it so that it's this huge franchise. It's bigger than anything kids at the time had ever seen. But every child had a deeply personal connection to it specifically because you could choose. Well, first of all, you could choose your Game Boy Color, including the translucent purple as you're talking about, which is very cool in the 90s. We should bring that back. But you choose red and blue. You choose your team of 6 monsters that you can catch and swap out. Out of the 150, you get your choice of like 3 starters. You get to name your character. You don't have to play as like Mario or any other characters. You can put in farts or whatever. And that's really cool. That's another thing that was very that kids hadn't really gotten before, because you're usually, when you get children's media, you're kind of force-fed. It's like this, the action team. Mike, I'm Mike. Brian, I'm Brian. And there's no really like personal options to it. But Pokemon was very like, the world is yours. So.
And you had a reason to do the cable finally too. There's not
you don't
transfer
unless you're like a cool kid who's really into like battling people with Tetris. The Game Boy cable, which came with the thing, wasn't used for a whole heck of a lot, but all of a sudden the Pokemon thing was like, hey, we found a great use for this.
Oh man, I have the faintest idea. I think it was in 3rd grade though. I think it was the game first. Because I could have sworn I'd watched the anime first, but that may not be the case. But I just remember getting that and being like, oh my god, what is this? And then pretty much a constant fight with my parents after that point for control over the Game Boy, because they would not let me on it that long. But here I am.
You won.
Yeah. I can get a Game Boy.
I think it was the TV show, but I can't really recall. But I may remember being in the house that I grew up in, like 1st or 2nd grade, and watching the TV show there. So that's as far back as my memory goes.
Well, cool. My first one was the TV show. They it aired like, so they didn't have it. So eventually Pokemon became on Kids WB, which is like a big animated programming block owned by Warner Brothers. But first, because they had trouble, like they couldn't really, it was like an untested concept, so they'd have to like sell it to like on syndication, on barter syndication, where basically they had to pay for like some ad dollars for it. And so, but because it was like untested, because syndication blocks are are bizarre mixes of like classic TV shows and like local television, it was always like 5:30 Green Acres, 6 a.m. Pokemon, 6:30 morning news with Ted, and like it was the weirdest schedule. And Pokemon like somehow managed to like battle against like kids waking up like, oh, am I dead? Oh, like so early. And I don't know if a series can make a child like about to go in late elementary school, about to go into middle school like me, like wake up at 6 a.m. to catch it, can do anything. You got a hit. But yeah, that's it, guys.